Not that I know of. And we're going to be in costume for purple people. That's right. I think we're close. Let me see. Go ahead. Gather the spirit.
Are you ready for the first hymn?
Yeah, gather the spirit.
I'm Lisa Conger, your lay leader today. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane. We're glad to have you with us. UUCS is a welcoming congregation, and we appreciate who you are and who you are striving to be, your unique background, beliefs, or lifestyle. If you're one of our long-term members or have been here a short time, or if this is your very first time, we're delighted to have you. And we welcome also those streaming with us. I have a couple of announcements and acknowledgements. So let me first call your attention to the beautiful bouquet in front. It was brought this morning by Bob Sloma and Kathy Cullum, and it was from, as they described it, a little guerrilla forest that their son Joseph, who passed away, had started. And he had planted these plants, Oregon white oak or Gary oak and ponderosa pine, and someone pulled them up, roots and all, and so they managed to replant them, the parents did, but someone came along and just destroyed everything. So this is a way to kind of commemorate Joseph as well as the beauty of the forest. I didn't have to say that before, it's hard. I'd also like to thank John Hancock, who is our guest pianist, and of course Todd in the booth, and Deb, our music person. And we couldn't do the service unless it was with all of you, so we appreciate that. And I do have one other thing announcement before we greet one another, and that's from Stephanie in the RE. Next Sunday is Halloween, and there will be a party for the kids during Children's Chapel, immediately after the Time for All Ages, during the second service. Kids are welcome to wear costumes that accommodate face coverings, aren't too scary for the little ones. We also invite children to bring their pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters for a game that will ultimately benefit Trick or Treat for UNICEF. So, take a few minutes now and greet one another, and be sure to say hello to someone you don't know. I forgot that we do have a special announcement by Sue Stewart, so my apologies.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you. Yes, and isn't it nice to be greeted when you arrive by someone who's happy to be here, too? I coordinate the ushers, so I'm not Gordon Diddens today, as it says in your service. I hope you can tell that difference. But so I'm going to just give you a little bit of information about what I do and why, and tell you what it would be like for you to volunteer to be an usher. The ushers bring you your greeting and your order of service when you walk in, and maybe you might have a question. Maybe they can answer it for you, hopefully. And each week, I work in the office, and I send out an email to anyone who's volunteered to be an usher, and it has the schedule for several months. And you can choose which service you would like to be an usher at, the 9 o'clock or the 11. And Then I just fill out the schedule and send that to you weekly, and you arrive a few minutes early at the service you volunteered for, and we'll have order of service ready for you. And another function you would do is take a count of how many people are here at each service and report that to the office. We ideally would like 2 ushers for each service. And then where it really is helpful to have 2 people is when we do the pass the offertory or baskets around. And then you take a few minutes after the service, and maybe there's some paper laying around in the sanctuary, or somebody left a glass. You just clean it up so it looks nice when we have visitors during the week. So it's an easy gig, and I think it's one people enjoy. So if you're interested, you can contact me in the office on Mondays. I'm there from 10 to 2. I'm not going to be staying after the service since I already had the pleasure of being at the first service. But you're welcome. I'm in the directory to call me, and I'll answer any questions or take your name. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. I meant to say also that after this greeting, or after the service today, you can have coffee and conversation a little more thoroughly after. I'm sorry, you know what? I had a hard morning this morning. My mirror came off my medicine chest and just... So I feel like this is sort of Halloween week, and maybe this is kind of something that's going on. So I appreciate your understanding. So now we turn from our informal greeting of one another to formally begin our service by lighting our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, the symbol of our unity and solidarity, of our openness and inclusion, of our community and individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt where it has been found. Our opening reflection is a poem by Wendell Berry, Being Watchful. As soon as I felt a necessity to learn about the non-human world, I wished to learn about it in a hurry. And then I began to learn perhaps the most important lesson that nature had to teach me, that I could not learn about her in a hurry. The most important learning, that of experience, can be neither summoned nor sought out. The most worthy knowledge cannot be acquired by what is known as study, though that is necessary and has its use. It comes in its own good time and in its own way to the man who will go where it lives, and wait and be ready and watch. Hurry is beside the point, useless and obstruction. The thing is to be attentively present. To sit and wait is as important as to move. Patience is as valuable as industry. What is to be known is always there. When it reveals itself to you, or when you come upon it, it is by chance. The only condition is your being there and being watchful.
Our second hymn of the morning is number 163, For the Earth Forever Turning. Please stand as you're willing and able. Sing, we are joy.
Each time we gather as a congregation, there are always those who are with us in our minds and hearts and who we want to wrap in our love and care. We kindle light this morning for them. Let us share a moment in silence, embracing others who are here in our hearts this morning. You are welcome to say their names aloud as you are willing. Those named aloud and those remembered in the silence, and all those who are suffering elsewhere in our world this hour, we hold in our community of compassion. Now's the time in the service for the offertory, and in the more early service I said it was going to the Colville Confederated Tribes fire victims, which you could still designate if that's something you want, but that special collection was last week. So today, I'm just going to say we now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains our community and its mission in the outer to that larger world.
Good morning. All right, so we know that next Sunday is Halloween, but did you know that this Sunday, today, October 24th, is United Nations Day? It is. And there are many UU congregations around the country that are celebrating UN Sunday. So for today's Time for All Ages, I have an Indian folktale that has been adapted by Sophia Foz that relates to this year's theme of All In for Climate Justice, Food Equity, and Sustainability. And of course, anyone is welcome to come up for the story. You don't have to be a child. The story is called The Dog and the Heartless King. Once upon a time, there lived a king that cared for nobody but himself. He had grown richer and richer from the taxes he had forced his people to pay, while they had become poorer and poorer. The king's table was always heaped with delicious foods, while most of his people had only one plain meal a day, and sometimes not even that. But the heartless king did not care. If he had what he wanted, that was enough for him. One day, a hunter came to the palace gate along with his enormous dog. But the enormous dog was no ordinary dog, and her bark was like the roar of thunder. The first time she opened her big mouth and barked, the awful noise shook the walls of the palace and frightened the king. If the dog had stopped with one or two barks, the matter might have been forgotten. But again and again, her fierce roaring shook the palace and the earth itself. Before long, there was no resting between barks. The desperate king asked, "Why does your dog make such a deafening noise?" "The dog is hungry," said the hunter. Immediately, the king ordered that a big plateful of meat be brought in. In almost no time at all, the enormous dog licked the plate clean. Then at once she began barking again. A second plateful was brought. This the dog disposed of just as quickly as first, and again the dog began barking. Over and over the plate was filled, and over the enormous dog quickly ate the whole plateful and began barking just as loudly as ever. The king got angry and said, "You and your dog must leave the palace at once. We cannot endure this deafening noise any longer." "Your Majesty," said the hunter, "we have been sent by one greater than you. We are here to stay." The king was not used to having anyone speak to him in this manner. "Will nothing satisfy the hunger of your enormous dog?" the king said at last. "Nothing that is easy for you to give," said the hunter. "Your Majesty, there are people in this kingdom who are eating all the food and who are not sharing it with those who do the work in the field to make food grow. As a result, there are people who are always hungry. This dog feels the hunger of every person in this kingdom who does not have enough food to eat. As long as even one person is hungry, this dog will keep on barking." It had never occurred to the king that he had been doing anything wrong. He had thought that the people of his kingdom were simply supposed to do what he said. So he called his wise advisors together and asked, "What shall I do?" The wise ones bowed their heads and walked off to think over the question together. But try as hard as they could, the advisors could only see two possible solutions. Either the enormous dog must be killed, or else every hungry person in the kingdom must be fed. No one wanted to kill the dog. So the advisors returned to the king and told him plainly what had to be done. The king hesitated no longer. "Put all the servants on the palace grounds to work at once," he commanded. "Go to the storerooms and get all the bags of rice you can find. Pile them high on the carts. Take meat from my cupboards and gather vegetables and fruits from my gardens. Send servants out with these loaded carts into all the towns and villages in my kingdom. Command the servants to find all the people who are hungry. Give them these foods and keep on giving food until not a single person in the land is hungry." The advisors hurried away to do as their king commanded, the dog still barking all the while. All day long, day after day, the carts kept going until they had gone to every village in the land, and until food was taken to every house where someone was hungry. At last, the day came when the enormous dog stopped barking. She laid down quietly beside the king's chair. The dog was satisfied. All the people inside the palace grounds were happy at the peace in their minds. Everywhere in the land, people were contented. For the next few years, the enormous dog stayed by the king's side to be sure the king never reverted to his old ways. A few times, the dog barked to remind the king about justice, and each time the king remembered the important lesson he had learned. Finally, the dog was convinced that the king truly understood the meaning of justice. One morning, she simply got up, walked out of the palace, and went to bark for justice in a new land. The end. And now you can sing our child out to Children's Chapel for today.
It is time now for our meditation. I invite you to take some deep breaths and to sit in a relaxed, receptive posture. I will begin our meditation with this poem by J. Daniel Baudry. Breath. Tree, gather up my thoughts like the clouds in your branches. Draw up my soul like the waters in your root. In the arteries of your trunk, bring me together through your leaves, breathe out the sky.
And now, words to inspire. Can you imagine? By Mary Oliver. For example, what the trees do, not only in lightning storms or the watery dark of a summer's night, or under the white nets of winter, but now, and now, and now, whenever we're not looking. Surely you can't imagine they don't dance from the root up, wishing to travel a little, not cramped so much as wanting a better view or more sun, or just as avidly more shade. Surely you can't imagine they just stand there loving every minute of it. The birds or the emptiness, the dark rings of the years slowly and without a sound thickening, and nothing different unless the wind. And then only in its mood comes the visit. Surely you can't imagine patience and happiness like that.
Our guest speaker is Tim Coleman. He's been working on forest, wildlife, recreation, and social elements of national forest management for 40 years. He is co-founder of the Northeast Washington Forest Coalition and is the executive director of the Kettle Range Conservation Group. He is passionate about wilderness, wolves, and human spiritual development. He is devoted to protecting the health of the planet. Tim and his wife Sue are mountain climbers, skiers, and gardeners and orchardists. Welcome, Tim.
It's good to be here to talk about the balance of life and activism that inspires us all. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That's a law of the universe. What goes up must come down in the state of gravity. And activism is an essential part of that gravity. It helps guide us in our faith and in our vision for a healthy world. I want to talk a little bit today about wildfire, wildlife, wilderness, and ecosystem health. But first, I want to do it in the context of your own axiom: create community, find meaning, and work for justice. All things are connected. Even a pinch of soil has maybe 1,000 organisms that haven't even been identified by science that are critical to the function of the soil life, to the tree roots, to the plants, to the things that give us oxygen, the forest, and in the oceans, the complexity of the life there that provides most of our oxygen. How often do we think every breath comes from that life? And that in our exchange, we return carbon dioxide that the forest relishes. I spent my time over the years of activism sitting in trees, sitting in front of bulldozers, writing a lot of appeals, challenging in court actions that left our forests on the ground or on the backs of log trucks, the defouling of our salmon streams, the loss of sacred spaces and special places to us all. I became inspired to be an environmentalist when I was a junior in high school, when the chemistry teacher had us go out and test the water in the local stream. So I picked a stream I knew about. I just went and took this little beaker and grabbed some water and tested it and found out that there wasn't enough oxygen in that water to sustain fish. And I love fishing. So I'm like, well, I got to do something about this. And then I fell in love with the wilderness. I went on a hike in Japan in 1973 with a guy from Utah. He took me up Hokendake, and I'd never climbed a mountain before. And that was it. I was hooked. It's like now I understood what faith was. Now I understood that feeling I had in the Immaculate Conception Church in Gilbertville, Iowa, where I used to feel like I could fly. It was like, this is what I was thinking of. Maybe it was from the past I was hearing it, but whatever it was, it created a lifetime of advocacy, and especially for things that are wild, because animals can't vote. They can't speak to members of Congress. They don't write letters to our newspapers and say, please do this, don't do that. That's left to activists. That's left to you and me, and maybe you're only a one-time activist when you write a letter to the editor and say, please don't cut down these trees, or please don't kill these bears or these wolves. In 1988, I spent 6 weeks in northern British Columbia trying to stop the BC wolf kill in February and March. It was cold, it was windy, it was snowy, the people didn't want us there. We had snowball fights at noon in Fort St. John with the high school kids who would show up every day dutifully to throw snowballs at us. And I mean, it was really quite the experience. I saw my first wolf. The second wolf I ever saw in my life was in the Kettle River Range 2 years ago. That wolf was killed in that following fall. It was the last member, as a female, adult female from the Sherman Pack. And y'all probably know about all the wolves that have been killed there. It's really heartbreaking, and in particular, it's heartbreaking because it's one of the wildest places in Northeast Washington. So even in the wildlands of the Kettle River Range, wolves cannot live safely because of livestock, and because of one livestock owner, and because the government agency won't change the way they do business that's basically based on early 20th century livestock management. Take the cows out, put them out in the forest, thick forest, lots of trees, they get trapped, they get lost, they become easy prey, and they displace the native ungulate species that the wolves depend on. And the wolves are very territorial. Another issue about activism occurred just the other day. And and that was the Fish and Wildlife Commission call on Friday. It was about authorizing a spring recreational bear hunt. And you know, bears hibernate in the wintertime, and females with cubs, which are born usually around February, come out of the den after having fed those cubs for months, and they're starved, and they want greens more than anything. And so, where do they go? They go to the greenest pastures they can find. And incidentally, that is one of the reasons that the Fish and Wildlife Commission thinks they should have a spring bear hunt, because it's easy to identify a female with her cubs out in a grassy field, and hunters are asked not to kill them. Very nice that they ask them to do that. The problem is that the mother bears stash their cubs before they go out, because they have to protect them from the male bears who want to breed again. They want to eat the cubs so the female goes back into estrus. And it's, you know, aside from the life cycle of these bears, they may not reach breeding age until age 4 or 5. They may not have very many litters of bears. I mean, if you're a hunter, does it make any sense to kill the female that's producing the prey that you want to hunt? You know, it's like it's not allowed in Idaho, it's not allowed in Oregon, and it shouldn't be allowed in Washington State either. So 100 activists waited for 3 hours to talk to the Fish and Wildlife Commission. You know, I mean, dedicated, 100 UW Law students, activists from here, my colleague Chris Bachman. I mean, it was a wonderful turnout. And it inspired the commissioners to say, whoa, just a second here, we better think about this some more. And that's exactly what we were asking them to do. Please do not do this. So that's what activism is all about. It's about speaking up for Mother Earth. It's about hugging a tree now and then. Hey, I get inspired by big trees. You know, I just get a little buzz when I give a tree a hug. And I love going into the wilderness too, you know, those special places that are protected for future generations. And, you know, the thing about wilderness, it's so cool. It's not like other, you know, like the Soil Conservation Service or the U.S. Forest Service. You know, it was created basically because of the profligate widespread logging of the timber barrens back in the 19th century and early 20th century. That led to the creation of the U.S. Forest Service. That was done to fix the problem. Soil Conservation Service was created because the Midwest, the East, the Rocky Mountain West was dumped in the East Coast into windstorms in the 1930s. So it led to the creation of the Soil Conservation Service. Well, that was a reactive, corrective decision to create those. But the Wilderness Act was created rather as a way to protect the future for future generations, that we can go out into places in the Cascades, in the Selkirks, and the Rocky Mountains, and we can find those special places. And I'll tell you what, just like I found when I climbed my first mountain in Japan in 1973, it inspires us, and it never fails to inspire us. And those places are the last sanctuary for creatures like grizzly bear and caribou and lynx and so many other species, songbirds, which I really love. And I love wildflowers too. You know, there's a form of activism, it's called gardening. I mean, just raising your own food and feeling the soil in your hand and raising flowers to basically give thanks to the sky and give thanks to the sun and the rain. You know, a little act of humbleness. And, you know, even if it's just a flower pot on the windowsill of your house, there's an act of kindness in that. And I think that that's a form of activism. So, you know, I want to talk a little bit about this, the latest campaign, which is, you know, we go from the forest is bad, you know, you got to cut it down. That was in the 1960s. You know, these are decadent trees. See how the tree tops are dying. You know, better cut them down and plant some really thrifty young trees while we'll haul these off to the mill to saw up and make a ton of money. And, of course, then we've learned a lot about the ecosystem that lived under those trees, like how complex it is and how much carbon it stores and how important it is to the climate that we keep those trees standing. Well, now we're told the newest thing is the forest is a threat to our community because of wildfire. Okay. Well, Dr. Jack Cohen, just saw a webinar from him this week. He says, look, folks, it's the distance from 100 feet from your house out that makes all the difference in communities surviving wildfire. And he had all these pictures from Colorado, big fires in Colorado in the Front Range, pictures from Paradise in California and elsewhere. And it showed how the fire would burn right up to the edge of the community, just totally burn the trees and everything. Then it goes across the road, and then the trees are green, and all the buildings are burned down. And it turns out that what the problem was is what they call the home ignition zone. So it's the area around your structure that makes all the difference. And whether you clean your gutters out, whether you have non-flammable siding, you don't have a bunch of shrubbery and wood up next to your house, that's what makes a difference. It's not the trees that are the fault. Okay, so let's not blame the forest, okay? It's not that we shouldn't thin and we don't use trees in our building and construction, but it's no reason to log the last wildernesses that are out there. And they've been doing it, the Forest Service has been doing it on Sherman Pass, and I've been fighting it, and I helped form the Northeast Washington Forest Coalition 18 years ago. We got along great until about 3 years ago. Okay, and then everything went to heck, and it probably was Sonny Perdue, in the Trump administration that did it. But it definitely had a significant effect, and it's still quite visible. 60-acre clear cuts, 40-acre clear cuts back to the 1980s and 1990s when we had the timber wars. So I just really want to thank those people who are activists, who write a letter, or who even just speak to your elected officials and say, I really value this forest a lot. Kathy McMorris Rogers, how about you protect the Selkirks and the Kettle River Range wild areas as wilderness so we can pass them on to future generations? It's not about access. The majority of the landscape is already eroded. There's these few roadless areas, about 22 of them in the Colville National Forest, that are all broken into little pieces, and mostly because they weren't easy to get to with a log truck. Okay? And they're super important. And so it's not about excluding somebody with an ATV. There's plenty of places you can ride a motorized vehicle. There's plenty of places you can mountain bike. And on that point, I will say about wilderness, it is amazing to me that one of the most efficient machines ever created, the bicycle, is being used to fight protecting wildlands. Folks, I'm just saying, in this time of COVID and craziness and conspiracies, that we all try to go like, whoa, didn't we chew that gum last night? It's going to fix itself. It's got to fix itself. And I hold out so much hope for the young folks that I know right now. They are activists, and they are smart, and they are dedicated, and they are voters. And that's where it's going to change. And the old saying back in the Earth First days was, sing back the bison and dream back the swan. There's a lot to be said about prayer. There's a lot to be said about those flower gardens. There's a lot to be said about poetry and young people and old people too. We all get there, right? I think there's a lot of room for hope, and I hope that my words today and my passion for all things wild gives you some bit of strength as well. Thank you.
Please stand as you're willing and able for our closing hymn. It's number 1066, O Brother Sun.
Our benediction is by Wendell Berry. We have lived our lives by the assumption that what was good for us would be good for the world. We have been wrong. We must change our lives so that it will be possible to live by the contrary assumption that what is good for the world will be good for us. And that requires that we make the effort to know the world and learn what is good for it. Amen, blessed be, salam alaikum, and shalom.